Greetings, this is Mr. Nobody, the art of making America great again, now for the economy. Let's start with inflation and deflation and all of those kinds of things. The money supply. What should since we've got a Federal Reserve, what should it be doing? Because, well, let's understand what that's about. See, the money supply is supposed to reflect overall the size of the economy. There can be occasions where there's not enough money to go around, and you have what's called a depression. There's also occasions where you have just too much money, and the money loses its value because that's inflation. But it isn't just a matter of trying to strike some kind of precarious balance between falling on this side or falling on that side of the mountain, or falling up this side of the horse versus falling off that side. It's really more a matter of if you're going to create money, there should be a reason for it. So let's talk about that a little bit. See, a lot of people didn't understand inflation, and I think now we've kind of come to the point where, once again, they don't seem to understand it. So they say, well, I'm going to help fix problems by what? Price fixing? I mean, those of us who lived through that back in the 1970s, we saw what happened. Shrinkflation. I have these childhood memories of buying, just my favorite little candy bars, which in those days might have been maybe 25 cents or 35 cents for a nice big candy bar. And suddenly, price freeze. That 35-cent candy bar will always be 35 cents, until the rule changes again. So what did they do? They made it smaller and smaller and smaller until what used to be this nice big bar is, almost like a little piece of, like those Halloween candy things that you get, It's almost that small. It was just shrinking and shrinking. They didn't have a name for it at that time. Now we actually do, because some of that's happening again already. We call it shrinkflation. It just means if you're going to operate economically, you have to give something has to give somewhere. It just has to. And when it does, if you can't send the price up, then what you do has to go down, either in the amount or the quality, or something has to go down. So that's why that's not really how to fix that. But really, creating money isn't always a bad thing. It really comes down to what do you do with the money you create. If you just create money and hand it to anybody who wants it or needs it or whatever, you have created inflation, pure and simple. But if you use this money for specific things that are for the good of society, with money that was thus raised, we built railroads, we built roads, tunnels, bridges, and so forth, hospitals, all these different kinds of things that are useful, to the community at large, and that have brought the standard of living. A lot of technology was developed. Even, for example, World War II. We printed a bunch of money to pay for World War II. But having printed that money, we developed a lot of weapons and things. That of itself might not be worth much, but a lot of what went into weapons was. We learned to make motors for Jeeps, which after the war became motors for cars. You see? And so on. Electronics for radars, which then became electronics for radios and then computers and televisions and so forth. I don't know if televisions were really a game, but it's something we live with now. But at any rate, obviously it's something that people wanted. So I guess you can call it a game from that standpoint, and properly used, and there really wouldn't be anything wrong with it. So all these kinds of things, they increase the standard of living. We learn to be more efficient in how we do certain things because we had to. And that worked. So these kinds of things have expanded our economy, the goods and services. And we learned the agricultural skills to help grow more food and things of that nature. all of that, you see, we've increased the size, as it were, of the economic pie. And what that means is you can slice it up into more pieces, and the pieces themselves will be just as big as they were before when the pie was smaller. It's just now you've got more of them. You have a larger economy. And so when the increase of the money supply stays in proportion with the increase of the economic growth, you see, then you don't get inflation. This is why it was that huge amounts of money were created during both the Carter administration and then the Reagan administration. They both produced a lot of money. But in the Carter, we had runaway inflation that rivaled what we've seen in our last few years. Some say it goes beyond. I'm not so sure of that, but that's kind of a number crunching issue. I'm not going to get into it. Either way, it was really large and way out of hand, and things that people weren't ready for and hadn't seen, and hopefully we don't see again, or at least not for a long, long time. You see, but interestingly enough, the next administration also printed a bunch of money and handed it out. But they handed it into various things. They poured it into things like defense and so forth, which developed other technologies, like especially our computer technology and other technologies that, once the war effort's kind of over with, these technologies become useful for so many other things that help so many people. So we have we have very little inflation, even though the money supply increased. And that right there is the ticket. That's the difference between an economy that inflates or else you depresses because you say, oh, let's just keep our money valuable, keep it strong, keep the dollar strong. Yeah, well, Britain tried to do that after the First World War, and they said, okay, we're going to put the pound back on the gold standard. And for a little while, they forced it to be that way. But they didn't make allowances for things like people had accrued debts when the pound wasn't worth so much. And now suddenly you got to pay that same debt in these massive gold English pounds. You're wiped out. So you have to make allowances for those kinds of things, and they just didn't think of that, and it was a disaster. And they finally just had to let go of that and go back to a world of inflation. And inflation finally crept up, and now it barely matters if the pound has been decimalized because the fractions thereof barely amount to anything anymore. So that's what we have to do about inflation. And that also has to do with employment. You find useful things for people to do. Very simple. Even a homeless person, you don't just hand them money or food or something. You say, you have a job. It's a simple job. Here's a couple city blocks. Pick up the litter. And whenever something, keep it clean. Whenever somebody drops something and doesn't throw it away or makes a mess, pick up the thing, clean the mess. That's your job. Do that job, and we'll see to it you got food or something like that. So you're not just handing them food. You're saying, do this simple, useful thing that enhances the standard of living. People live there. The town is cleaner, and so forth. And then you see, you're paying for a service that way. And then that way, it's not just a charity. You are actually, in a tiny incremental way, making the city worth more as a place to live. You see, businesses will feel safer, be able to do better at their business. You have increased the standard of living in a given community. And we'd be paying for that, not just handing out money because, oh, gee, they're poor, they're needy. Yes, they are poor, they are needy. But when you hand them free stuff and ask nothing in return, that's always wrong. And I think in the next one I can talk a little bit about that, and then I want to get into tariffs after that. Thanks for listening.